Morena tato, tena tato e hui mai ne I tene ata. No mai rā ki te rā tuatoru o tene hui, po whakairo, connect and thrive. Ka nui hoki ngā mihi ki ngā kai whakahaere o tēnei kaupapa. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Bill MacNaught aho. Kei te mahi o ki te puna mātoronga o Aotearoa, hei tuma whakahaere. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Colleagues, if you visit our stand, the National Library stand here at the LIANZA conference, or indeed if you look at the National Library's website, you'll see quite an emphasis on the work that we're doing around the World War I commemorations. We're doing this in collaboration with colleagues in Archives New Zealand. They have digitized the entire set of New Zealand Defence Force personnel files from World War I. It's a massive amount of data that we're connecting with, and together we have produced an exhibition that we open on Thursday this week. Because on Thursday, the 16th of October in 1914, the first troop ships sailed from Wellington to go to war. The exhibition that we're going to put on show talks about life in New Zealand as well throughout the war. We'll also be, of course, spending a bit of time talking about battles and campaigns and the brave exploits of our ancestors. And sadly also some of the events of which we are less proud, including various examples of man's inhumanity to man. The idea behind the exhibition is that we will shed more light on the events of 100 years ago, including, of course, some discussion around Gallipoli, this defining moment in New Zealand history. Sadly, it was not the war to end all wars, and we will be using the exhibition as a platform for contemporary conversations about the legacy over the last 100 years, and indeed what it means for us today in New Zealand. And the gentleman on the screen in front of you at the moment tells his story as a refugee from war in the Middle East today. So because we collected so much material 100 years ago and since then, we can connect our information, our knowledge, with the knowledge that archives have made available. And when you put it together with all the information that we've got already in papers past, which we produce in collaboration with many of you in the audience here today, there is a powerful amount of knowledge from the past that we are making available today to help some discussions about the knowledge that we want to co-create for the future. So that's what we think we do at the National Library. We collect, connect, and co-create knowledge. This year, we have a new Deputy Chief Executive as my new boss. Peter Murray is the new DCE who started on the 1st of July this year. Peter's in charge of a group of services, including not only National Library, but Archives New Zealand, the Government Information Service, and some of those colleagues from GIS are here at the conference this week. And if you go to the .gov.nz stand, you will meet some of my colleagues from GIS. Peter is not entirely new to the department. He has been Deputy Chief Executive in charge of shared services for the last 3 years. So shared services includes finance, HR, property, those sorts of shared services. So Peter's got a reasonably good understanding of how we operate as National Library, but he himself admits that coming into the role on the 1st of July, he's beginning to get that deeper understanding of what we're really about in the library. And not surprisingly, he's asking questions about what we do, why we do it. He's also in charge of the portfolio of projects that we are seeking to deliver as a branch within the department. And the most obvious project, perhaps, to talk about would be the project to move the Treaty of Waitangi from the building in Mulgrave Street, where colleagues in Archives New Zealand look after many priceless documents, including the Treaty of Waitangi. And so we will be moving that document along with the Declaration of Independence of Northern Chiefs of 1835 and the suffrage petition. This is Kate Shepherd, believe it or not. It's a sculpture printed through 3D printers that we currently have on display in the foyer at the National Library. It was in Parliament grounds. It's come to us. I think it's going to go to Te Papa at the end of the year. But yeah, the project that we're working on, the DIA archive project, will move those 3 key documents of government to new premises in the National Library building in Molesworth Street. And by the end of this year, we should be able to announce the design team with whom we're working to make this project a reality. As the new DCE, Peter is helping us to strengthen the value statement about the National Library of New Zealand. Since we joined the department 3 years ago, we've had lots of conversations about what the National Library does and what value we are adding to the department's objectives, what value we're adding to the government's objectives, and indeed what value we are delivering to the people of New Zealand. Not surprisingly, the point about that slide is that we had a visit recently from Rolly Keating, the Chief Executive of the British Library, and Rolly was able to share with us his experience of the research that they have done 10 years ago and again last year, looking at the economic value delivered by the British Library. And my bosses are interested in us perhaps using that same research methodology to look at how we can put a figure on the economic value that we're delivering. For those of you who are not familiar with the British Library research, what they reckoned was that for every £1 spent in the British Library, they delivered a return, an economic return for the country of about £5. Well, I think it was precisely £5 for every £1 spent in the British Library. That kind of evidence would be quite helpful for us, but of course, we're well aware that the value that we deliver is not just economic value. And if you look at the current legislation around the National Library, it talks about our purpose being to enrich the economic and cultural life of New Zealand. So it's not simply to reduce everything to monetary value is not entirely helpful, but it would be good to have some robust evidence that we do indeed deliver economic value. In the Act, the purpose clause of the Act, Clause 7, has got 3 subsections, A, B, and C. And the first one, A, is the one I think that is most familiar to colleagues, and certainly it's the one that my bosses in the Department of Internal Affairs tend to think of first when they think about the work of the National Library. And that talks about collecting and safeguarding the documentary heritage of the nation. And we certainly do a lot of that. That's something we take very seriously. There are 2 other clauses there, though. B talks about furthering and supporting the work of other libraries across New Zealand. And C talks about working alongside colleagues in similar institutions, including overseas library partners. So we certainly still do 7A. We collect, we have done for many, many years, and we intend to go on collecting. One of the most recent examples of an addition to the collections is the papers that tell the story of the top twins. For colleagues in New Zealand, I don't need to explain further why that's of interest. For colleagues from overseas, just trust me, I'm a librarian. This is important. So that's some of the more interesting material that we've acquired recently, and there is a very good blog about it. Valerie Love, one of our staff, has put together a very interesting blog that brings some of that collection to life, and I recommend you go and have a look at that on our website when you get a chance. So Clause 7B, the need to strengthen this understanding of the value of 7B is something that's preoccupied me for the last 3 years since we've been part of the department. There are lots of things that we've been doing for many years to support the work of other libraries, and one of the most recent conversations to illustrate what we're doing would be the work that we're doing around collaborative procurement of ebooks for public libraries. And this is a conversation that's been going on for some time, but I suppose since the APLM meeting at April, the Association of Public Library Managers, that is, at their meeting in April, we talked about a proposal for a national ebook procurement scheme. We've talked with our colleagues in DIA, who are very good at procuring services with great efficiency, so we've talked to them about how we do this properly. We had a workshop with representatives from the public library sector looking at the requirements and agreeing core principles, and you'll see there that we have got plans that will probably result in an RFP early next calendar year with a go live in the middle of next year, which I find quite exciting, really, if we can get that to work. Who knows, we might even extend it to school libraries and others if we can get this working well. I think it will be a really good example where the National Library can play a role to support other parts of the library sector in New Zealand. If you're interested in more details about this, I'd encourage you to talk to our new Manager of Services to Public Libraries, a certain Corin Haynes, and Jenny MacDonald, who's here. You probably see Jenny at the National Library stand during the conference. Both of them have been working really closely to make this project happen. We also support, through work that we've been doing for a number of years now at National Library, we support the Public Library APNK that David mentioned in his kind address to introduce me. The Aotearoa People's Network Kaharoa has been going for a good number of years now, and it did initially build on work that we had done in the UK. So I was quite interested to see this announcement from the Society of Chief Librarians in the UK. These are public library managers. And on their website, they talk about a recent report on how libraries help to bridge the digital divide. And this is something that I've taken for granted for many, many years now, that that's what public libraries have been doing. It's so normal for us now, perhaps, that some people will take it for granted. And again, moving into the DIA context, I found it interesting that, first of all, there was a question about why we were doing any of this at all. And so I referred colleagues to Clause 7B of our legislation. That's the basic reason why we're helping libraries to do this. But actually, increasingly, colleagues are getting quite excited about the work that we've been doing with APNK and the platform that we have to reach citizens with all sorts of useful information. And when you connect that with the government's plans around Result 10, which is to enable citizens to do business, transact with government online easily. I have been saying for some time now that the existing infrastructure that we have in public libraries, we have not only the IT connectivity, but we have got physical presence in most communities around the country. We have got skilled staff who are trusted by local communities around the country. Why wouldn't we want to build on that as government to help to get information about government across to the citizen more easily? So I'm delighted that at the conference this year we have two stands alongside the National Library stand. We have the .gov.uk stand and we have the Real Me stand alongside them, and they are both heavily involved in work around Result 10. So I think it's a brilliant opportunity for the public librarians in the audience to go and tell my colleagues just exactly what you do to bridge the digital divide in your communities, week in, week out, throughout the year, and explain how the trusted infrastructure that you have in your communities is something that government, if it's smart, will make more use of and build on that. There are significant sums of money being invested in making Result 10 a success. And it's an opportunity for us to build on that and get some return ourselves for the shared investment in helping to get information to our citizens more effectively. If you look at the recent results for the activity around Result 10, the target by 2017 is that 70% of a basket of transactions in various government departments will be conducted online. And at the moment, we're just below 40%. So there's a bit of work to do to make some progress there. But you'll see on the screen there an example with passport renewal. And I know for a fact that some of you in the audience have renewed your passports online. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the general feedback that I've been hearing is that it's extremely easy to renew your passport online. So that's the kind of thing that the government is serious about doing. We know that there are lots of clunky examples. We know that. If you want to go and tell them at the Real Me and gov.uk desks some of your horror stories, feel free to do so. And I know that some of you already have. Great. Give them that feedback. Tell them how it can be made better, but be absolutely clear that the government is not going to rest until it has made it easy for citizens to conduct business with government online. So go and talk to them. Great opportunity to talk to my colleagues. So I mentioned Real Me, and that's the identity verification scheme. And it's had various clunky versions so far, and it's probably not perfect. If you think it's not perfect, go and tell the Real Me staff at the stand in this conference. But regard it as a collaboration. It's an opportunity for us to get some return on an area where the government is spending heaps of cash to get this right. So why don't you help them get it right from your point of view? Just think about the opportunities for libraries to exploit a trusted system of identity verification. There are opportunities for us. Going back to the legislation about National Library, I've also had to explain to colleagues 2-3 years ago why we are doing any work with schools at all. Because the general view is, well, that's Ministry of Education, is it not? Why are we doing this? We've gone past that stage where colleagues understand the why of what we're doing, and it's not just because it's in the legislation, although as you'll see on screen, I have the power to do this work as long as the Minister thinks fit. Well, we've been doing this for about 70 years. This is the wording from the current Act. But we have been investing in services to schools for about 70 years, and we intend to continue that work, delivering value to schools and to students across New Zealand. The way that we're going to do it is going to change. Already, we've been making improvements around making the content of EPIC a lot easier for schools to get access to, making it less clunky to get access to that valuable content. We'll continue to make improvements like that, and we are working on smarter ways of operating in a digital environment to support every school across the country. And you'll see more of that in the months ahead. Our Services to Schools team are also doing some really good work around digital citizenship. And again, this is something that's important to the Department of Internal Affairs. As you'll understand, of course, why. If we're asking citizens to operate in a digital environment, doing business with government, then they have to be able to operate skillfully in a digital environment. And we have some expert staff working in our Auckland Centre helping to build programs around digital citizenship for students in schools right now. The Ministry of Education has invested a lot in the Network for Learning and the Pond portal. I've spoken to you before about this, I think. If you haven't had a look at it, do have a look at it. It's really important. But we're working with colleagues in the Network for Learning to improve the content that is available through the Pond portal. And increasingly, it's obvious to me that the Ministry sees real value in the expertise that we have in the library sector to deliver good value through the Pond portal. We've been doing a lot of work through Digital New Zealand. We're also digitising content from the Alexander Turnbull Library. We've done mass digitisation through Papers Past, for example, but we still have to engage in what I would describe as boutique digitisation, where our precious taonga in the Alexander Turnbull Library are certainly too fragile, too valuable to send overseas, as we do with some of the duplicate copies for microfilm of Papers Past, for example. We take great care over the digitisation of some of the taonga that we have in the Alexander Turnbull Library. And this is an example you'll see of a diary from 1914, personal diary from 1914. It's in remarkably good condition, I think, for a document that's 100 years old. That's not an accident that it's in remarkably good condition. We have a team of experts in our collection care team who make sure that these treasures are kept well. But of course, by digitising them, we can share that content with schools across the country. And we have got a collaborative programme building up with the Ministry of Education over the next 5 years, developing fit-for-purpose classroom content around World War I in various themes. This is the diary, one of the war diaries of William Malone. And most of the New Zealanders in the audience will know that William Malone was a leading figure in the First World War in the New Zealand forces. He was a commander of the Wellington Regiment at Gallipoli. And the significance of Malone's diaries, this is from nzhistory.net, and it explains for everybody just why Malone's attitude to his British superiors was part of that process that made Gallipoli a defining moment for New Zealand history. Now, what we're doing in the Alexander Turnbull Library particularly is we're telling the story of the people of New Zealand around World War I. It's these personal accounts that are so important, I think. What you get when you look at the military personnel files in Archives New Zealand are the official government records, which are invaluable evidence as well of what happened. But it tells you more about what the government's attitude was to its soldiers and the war. It doesn't really give you that human insight into what went on in World War I. So sadly here you'll see this is the entry saying that Malone was killed in action. This is an illustration from the H series of photographs. We're quite excited about the H series. And if you want to know more about it, go and talk to my colleagues on the National Library stand during morning tea. These are high-resolution images that we're making available free of charge for reuse, using new guidelines around use and reuse of our collection items. It's quite a big development for us that we're making it a lot easier for any New Zealander to reuse the material, not just find it and admire it, but reuse it. And the H series is something, as I say, of which we're particularly proud to make that available. It's not just the great and the good. What you see on screen is the entry for a diary about Jesse William State, who was a 41-year-old quarryman, married with 6 children, working in Whangarei when he decided to enlist in 1916. And you can read all about Jesse William State's account of the war in the diary that's available online through the National Library website. His diaries tell us how he felt when he embarked on the troopship in Wellington in 1916. And just a short extract that I want to read to you. He says, "This has been one of the most momentous days of my life. The march was grand, but it was very sad. The ranks were full of fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, and sweethearts, and at times we could hardly keep our formation. Felt very glad that none of my family were there, although I felt very lonely just then, and I would have shaken hands with a dog." Jesse was killed in France on the 1st of October, 1918. This is again from Archives New Zealand official records. The line before "killed in action" says "rejoined battalion." He had been on leave in the UK for a month or so. So there's not much of the human story in the official government account of the soldier's life in World War I. But when you put the two things together, the material that we have with the work that our colleagues in archives have, you get both sides of the coin. It's a much richer story that we can tell. On a happier note, I was in France this year. This is Lyon. This is a town hall in Lyon where IFLA had its conference this year. This is just a kind of average meeting room. And the breakout room was pretty special as well, I have to say. But so this is me at my annual meeting with my fellow national librarians, and I sit in nice, neat alphabetical order between the Netherlands on one side and Norway on the other side. And we discuss matters of great importance. The main reason I was over there in France this year, I'll come to in a second, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the Lyon Declaration. And some of you in the room will be well aware of the Lyon Declaration. For me, it was one of the big deliverables of the IFLA conference this year. I suppose just as the Trends report was the big deliverable from Singapore the year before, the Lyon Declaration, I think, is quite an important document. And in case you didn't know, LIANZA has signed up to the Lyon Declaration. Every one of you should read it. It's important. The reason I was there was to talk about digital preservation. And I took with me Steve Knight, whose smiling face you see in the middle of that photograph, clutching the flag of New Zealand. As you went up the staircase in the town hall, they had all the flags of all the nations, of all the national librarians. They do things in a certain way in France, and that was pretty cool. But more importantly, we were sharing our expertise with European colleagues. We were there with some Australian colleagues as well from National Library and state libraries in Australia. But Steve Knight, it's fair to say, is regarded as a bit of an expert. He delivered a presentation to all the national librarians present around digital preservation. As you heard Ingrid Parent say yesterday, digital preservation is something that is increasingly important. When you think about it, the equivalent of what we've been able to do around World War I, by collecting all that material from 100 years ago and making it available today, how do we do that with digital content if we don't look after it in such a way that it can be found and reused in 100 years' time? That's what digital preservation is all about. And the National Library has been working since before my time on building up its expertise in this particular area. The other thing that Ingrid said is that we should collaborate. And I completely agree. Collaboration is something that we do as a matter of course at National Library. We are all in this together. But we do have a centre of expertise for digital preservation. And when Ingrid spoke yesterday about the need for public libraries to be looking at digital preservation, knowing what I know about digital preservation, I think that's going to be a big challenge for most public libraries to tackle on their own. The only sensible way to do this is to work in collaboration. So I'm delighted to say that we have a business case going forward this year looking at how we might offer digital preservation as a service to colleagues in New Zealand. Was that applause? I wasn't fishing for, just checking if it was applause. It may be a bit premature, that's all. That's what I was going to say, is that it's a business case. So if we come and talk to you about how we can offer you digital preservation as a service, you need to understand that the only way that I'll be able to make this work is if it's cost neutral to the National Library. I think there are ways that we can do that. Working together, we can achieve economies of scale. I certainly am not expecting to make a profit out of any library in the country. We have to work together sensibly to achieve progress along these lines. But at least we've got that business case going forward. And I suppose looking at Steve's smiling face and thinking about the team that he manages and the expertise in that team leads me to my final point about the future skills. If we're to go on doing what we're doing in a digital environment, then we have got a lot of work to do to make sure that we've got the right skills in the National Library, indeed across the library sector in New Zealand. So I applaud the work that LIANZA is doing looking at future skills. And again, just for what it's worth, we're working with colleagues in the state libraries and National Library of Australia, looking at the digital skills in particular that we need for the future. And Corin Haynes is again my colleague who's leading that conversation with his colleagues in the Australian state libraries and National Library to make sure that we do collaborate, we do share experience, we share expertise in building the skills that we need to go on collecting, connecting, and co-creating knowledge. So that's a quick roundup of what we've been doing this year, where we're heading. There's lots more that we can say. Come and visit us on the National Library stand, but for now, that's it. Thank you.
We've got enough time for some questions. We've got a running mic around the room. Oh, 2 mics, so if you do have a question, please raise your hand first and then stand and introduce yourself. Oh, yeah.
As one of the largest populations of Pacific people in this city, and of course with the increasing acknowledgement of the population growth of the Pacific peoples in our country, what plans do National Library have in connecting with those Pacific islands to actually provide the information and resources that they're finding it so hard to maintain within their own own islands and countries, mainly because of the current climatic changes that are taking place?
So this year, Chris Sike, Chief Librarian of Alexander Turnbull Library, visited the Museum of Samoa to talk to colleagues about these very matters. And we have done a small amount of collaborative work with colleagues in Samoa. In fact, Rachel Essen, who reports to Chris Sike, went over to the opening of an exhibition about the events of 100 years ago. And I have to say they get treated with almost celebrity status when they go and visit over there. It's quite humbling, the respect with which they treat us. I think Chris and I both feel that we're only scratching the surface of the work that we could be doing, the work that we should be doing to build that relationship with Pacific Island colleagues. Right at the beginning of the year, we actually supported the National Librarian from Cook Islands to attend the CDNL meeting in Canberra, which is something that on their own, Cook Islands National Library just wouldn't have been able to take part in that type of event. Again, it's just a small, almost token gesture of support to give colleagues some idea of the problems that the Cook Islands National Library has got. Their entire library management system was down because somebody stole the PC. It's that level of infrastructure that is so fragile that when you think about the expertise that we have at the National Library in New Zealand around, just take digital preservation, for instance, there's no way that our colleagues in Pacific Islands would sensibly aspire to build that expertise if we can share our expertise with them. So we are working on it, but it's nothing. I have nothing to say of which I'm proud in that respect. So yeah, let's just keep talking about ideas of how we can do things. One of the things that I've learned in recent weeks, there's a bit of an industry around complexity theory and how you can be a leader in unpredictable times, and I've been on a training course. And one of the things that I've taken away from the first session was that in unpredictable times, you need to try new stuff. And if it works well, you build on it. If it doesn't work well, you do less of it. It's hardly rocket science, you'd think, but I think that's probably what we need to be doing with our colleagues in Pacific Islands. Let's just try some stuff, and if it works well, let's keep doing it.